No matter what you do or how hard you try, your habits never actually stick. Learning to set healthy and healed expectations for yourself and your habits is the key you've been missing. Setting realistic and attainable expectations that come from a place of self-love and compassion will build your confidence around a habit, motivate, and direct you. Instead of running from expectations and anxiety they've created in the past, I want us to start using them to our own advantage. Healthy and effective expectations support us building habits. They are aspirational. They inspire us to work towards our dream lives. They're flexible, adaptable, and compatible with our current lives and the way our brains work. They're both realistic and attainable, and most importantly, do not add extra stress, anxiety, or mental weight to our already chaotic lives. Expectations matter because they set the scene for our habits and growth. They suggest what we believe is possible for ourselves and what we expect of ourselves. It's important that we believe we're capable of building healthy habits and creating positive change in our lives. I expand on this in a past video, which I'll make sure to link in the description. But it's just as important that we have fair expectations of ourselves. We don't want to create expectations that involve unrealistic work, exertion, or impossible timelines. Those sorts of expectations are unfair and unrealistic, and it's both unhealthy and unproductive for us to expect the impossible from ourselves. Having unfair expectations like that leads to stress, anxiety, self-distrust, feelings of worthlessness, self-loathing, etc. We want to set accessible expectations that won't create additional stress or anxiety and won't become a roadblock to us building habits. Healthy expectations should motivate us and encourage our habit building. When we imagine these healthy expectations, they bring us joy and excitement. Those are two feelings that I really want you to learn how to have when you're setting expectations for yourself. This fosters your ability to build lasting habits. When it comes to actually setting these expectations, you want to consider what the goal is. And as you may remember from our previous video, the goal is to sustainably integrate a habit as part of your lifestyle. So that means no big jumps in what you expect from yourself. Instead, I want you to imagine slow, steady changes that will build the life you want. So start small with what you expect from yourself. Next, I want you to be very flexible with any numbers or timelines that you imagine. Often, I find it best to avoid numbers and timelines altogether. It eliminates the potential to disappoint yourself and the negative effect that not following through on your plan has on your self-trust. Self-trust is something we're working on building to support us creating habits and living our best lives. And so we really don't want to jeopardize that with our own expectations. If you're a variable, cyclical sort of person like myself, where your moods and energy levels differ day to day, it can be really helpful not to be too specific when setting expectations. It'll take some trial and error to discover what sorts of expectations work best for you and which ones do more harm than good when it comes to building habits. And when it comes to envisioning these expectations, I want you to treat them as suggestions and goals rather than things that need to get done. Remember, these habits are things that you want to add to your life. You are in control, and we want our expectations to reflect this. The expectations we set around habits are things we aspire to. They're meant to motivate us, not stress us out. You don't need the pressure that external expectations give to get stuff done. I know you may think you do, like how procrastination works for a lot of us, where we wait until a deadline is so close that the stress it produces pushes us to finally take action. But in reality, many of us have never experienced a supportive and low stress environment to see that we can thrive and do succeed without external pressure. This understanding of expectations supports you learning how to trust yourself and your own drive to create positive change in your life. When you view an expectation as a suggestion and something to strive for rather than fact, it gives you full control over your actions. And that feeling of freedom, combined with the self-trust we're building, can be all we really need to start making the positive choices that build a habit. So set expectations to encourage feelings of freedom and build your confidence, not threaten it. Now I want to share some insights from my own life. I had a phase last year where I wanted to get to bed at 10:30 every single night. My first approach was to immediately set the expectation that I would go to bed at that time every single night. Initially, I thought I'd be able to make myself follow this expectation, and I believed that if I wasn't able to, then it reflected negatively on me for not being able to control myself and be disciplined. I think I was able to follow this rule for about 4 days, which is honestly impressive, before I completely fell off, went back to my old sleep pattern, and began resenting this bedtime expectation altogether. Some nights, having that expectation even resulted in me staying up later than I'd been previously staying up. It also caused me to distrust myself when it comes to choosing a bedtime, ultimately making it harder for me to eventually create a healthy sleep pattern. The resentment I've started to feel towards an early bedtime was caused in part by the association I had between my success with that expectation and my self-worth, believing that I was somehow less valuable if I wasn't able to achieve that bedtime. When we set expectations like this, it can trigger our body's fight or flight response. Your body can quickly see how not achieving that expectation makes you feel. And to prevent that feeling, your body wants to keep you as far away from that expectation as possible, resulting in you potentially backtracking from the habit you were trying to build in the first place. Unfortunately, this nervous system response was not the only difficulty I was having in achieving that bedtime. Staying up late had begun to feel like the only way to exercise control in my life. Since going to bed on time was how I expected myself to act, and I felt pressure every night to follow that standard, I began to want to rebel. And my rebellious act was to stay up late, even when I knew it would be detrimental to my own life. Instead of following my preset bedtime, independently choosing the time I go to bed each night felt like the only way to be in control of something. And some days, especially after a long day of work, I do feel a need to exercise control in some way. If I hadn't set that specific 10:30 bedtime expectation to begin with, then going to bed early would still be a way to feel in control. You can see how sometimes expectations can really backfire if they're not coming from a place of freedom and understanding yourself. Anytime I set an expectation like this, the subtle anxiety it gives me and pressure it puts me under does not feel worth it. And importantly, does not create the desired outcome, which in this example would be going to bed early. So now, rather than setting any specific bedtime expectation for myself, I give myself the freedom each night to decide when I want to go to bed. When I give myself full control like this, it shows me that I trust myself and allows me to feel safe to choose a more supportive bedtime. This ultimately allows me to build my confidence around my ability to choose a healthy and supportive bedtime, and builds trust with myself that I will continue to make healthy choices more and more often. This results in me naturally wanting to go to bed at an earlier time, because I now base my choice on what actually feels most supportive for me and my body. And yeah, some nights I do choose to stay up late, and maybe that means I'm really tired the next day. But I still choose to trust myself and my own autonomy to make that choice every time and face whatever outcomes it brings. I don't rely on arbitrary expectations. Instead, I build my life around learning to understand and trust myself. Another expectation I tried setting for myself last year was to complete all my daily dishes and not leave any in the sink at night. Although this seems like a reasonable enough expectation, it still wasn't a successful or productive way for me to create the habit of getting the dishes done regularly. This expectation had no flexibility. It didn't account for the times when I'm exhausted after work or mentally unable to get myself to do the dishes. It added an extra weight in the back of my mind of something that needed to get done. That pressure caused me and my brain to resist and avoid the task altogether. Not because it was hard, but because the way I was trying to implement it via a rigid expectation caused a level of pressure and anxiety which my brain recognized as toxic and unsafe and did its best to avoid for me. Even if logically the expectation of me getting the dishes done every night is not a significant threat, my brain still sees it as such. Our brains are trying to help us, even if their anxious and avoidant responses feel unhelpful a lot of the time. We have to work with our brain and nervous system and create circumstances for ourselves that are the most compatible. Instead of trying to fight that subconscious reaction, I now set expectations that work with my brain. There's no reason to be setting strict expectations for yourself if that's never actually worked for you. So, alternatively, with regards to doing the dishes and just more generally cleaning, I like to make loosely structured lists of a variety of tasks I want to get done and can choose to perform or not. I allow myself to continually choose which tasks I want to perform and when. I give myself the freedom to choose to do the dishes as something I want to get done rather than something I simply expect of myself. I treat the items on my lists as suggestions and ideas to keep me relatively focused, and these cleaning lists usually span multiple days to weeks. With tasks I trust myself to eventually complete on my own time, or to decide that I no longer want to prioritize a specific task at this point in time. Without the pressure or anxiety from traditional expectations, the driving force becomes my own desire to live my life a certain way. And in this example, my desire to live in a clean environment. Whenever you have strict expectations, for example, do something for X amount of minutes, X times a week, it takes away a lot of the satisfaction you feel from actually choosing to do the task. Since it becomes what you expect of yourself, it no longer feels like a choice. The rigid expectation takes away the pride you get to feel when you choose to perform a task that you know is good for you and is building the habit you want. So instead, give yourself the freedom to choose tasks based on your mood, energy level, motivation, etc. Put the focus back on you and your choices. Choosing to build your expectations this way isn't seamless and likely won't feel easy in the beginning. You might initially feel more chaos and like this method isn't working, but over time you will discover what works for you. As long as you stay rooted in wanting to create a life that brings you peace, comfort, and joy. Here's another anecdote I have about setting expectations. Last year, whenever it was slow at work, I used to make these little to-do lists of all the things I wanted to get done and work on when I got home. When I wrote the lists, I felt genuinely excited to do those things. But whenever I got home, I almost never actually had the energy, and they no longer even felt like stuff I wanted to do. This would often make me feel bad about myself and guilty for not being able to follow through on the expectation I had. Like I was just being lazy. Even though, in truth, my original expectation didn't take into account the reality of how I'd feel after work and my body's need for rest. This is why it's so important to set loose expectations that don't force you into a box and aren't solely based on the state you were in when you created the expectation. I want to say that one again. Expectations that aren't based on the state you were in when you created them. Give yourself freedom and set expectations that will accommodate any state of being. If you remember from my earlier example on bedtime, I began to resent and avoid the expectation I'd created because I had my self-worth tied to my success. Having this connection has negatively impacted a lot of the habits I've tried to build over the years. It's really important that we learn how to disconnect our self-worth from the outcomes around our expectations. Think of it this way. We create these expectations to assist us in habit building. We want to be using them as ideals we're working towards, visions we see in our mind that inspire us to take the steps needed to make that vision come alive. It's not productive for us to put pressure on ourselves to achieve these expectations exactly or within a strict timeline. If we do that, then anytime we don't meet our expectation perfectly, we might see it as a reflection of our ability to succeed and consequently our value as an individual. I have personally struggled with the toxic mindset of believing that my success is tied to my worth and the unhealthy cycle that creates. We want to disconnect those two ideas because I know that no matter how close or far I am from whatever expectations I've held, that I'm just as valuable of a person and just as worthy of having the life I envision for myself. I know it can be hard to get to that place when you're so used to beating yourself up for everything that you don't view as a success. You may be relatively new to setting healthy expectations. And when that's the case, like with anything, it's gonna take some time and some failures to figure out what actually works for you. What styles of expectations are useful, and what mindsets around those expectations allow you to feel the most free. So remind yourself that you are learning a new skill and you don't expect yourself to be good at it or successful right off the bat. I believe that wherever you are on your habit building journey, you should always give yourself grace and kindness and detach your self-worth from your success in building habits. This idea can be really helpful when you're still learning how to be fair to yourself, which we honestly all are always learning to do better. You can experience creating a habit without feeling stress or anxiety around it. When you set flexible expectations, you're still able to check things off your to-do list without being perfect. Give yourself freedom to build your habits by creating flexible, achievable, and kind expectations for yourself. Trust that you'll make the choices that will create the life you want. Have that as your expectation. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit. So far, we've talked mostly about how loose and non-specific expectations benefit us. They allow us to redefine our relationship with expectations in a healthy way. They can also immensely reduce the amount of stress and pressure that more specific and structured expectations can create. When you're in the stage of healing your relationship with what you expect from yourself, I want you to focus on using those more general and open-ended expectations, as they will create the best results. But once we've reconstructed our relationship with expectations to be something that is healthy and supportive, and spent a good deal of time working with those less structured expectations, it may be time for us to push beyond that and explore reintroducing more specific and structured expectations to our lives. There are undeniable benefits to setting expectations that are more definitive. Specific expectations add structure to our days. Structure is essential. It supports us and allows us to use our more creative and free-flowing energy for what we really want and value, rather than focusing that energy on every little daily decision. That can be very overwhelming and lead to decision fatigue and analysis paralysis. Not to mention take up our energy and mental space. We can utilize more specific and structured expectations to tackle some of those less exciting decisions, like our bedtime, the time we wake up, when we do our laundry or go to the grocery store, how exercise and cleaning fit into our lives, etc. That will give us back a significant amount of our energy, allowing us to use it for the things that bring more joy into our lives. I want to share the story of how I came to have this understanding. A few weeks back, I finally got 3 days to myself. No work, no errands, apartment was completely clean, groceries stocked, you get the picture. This was the first time in months that I actually had some unstructured time for myself, and I was so excited for it. But my excitement was quickly shattered when I was met with the reality of that first day off. See, I hadn't realized how non-stop I'd been going until I finally had that time to pause. There was virtually nothing on my to-do list, other than things I'd been wanting to do and hadn't had time for, but absolutely nothing structured. I expected those days to feel amazing, to finally have the time for all the things I felt had been missing in my life. However, my mind and body's initial response to this complete lack of structure was to start feeling empty with no sense of purpose and to start experiencing depression and anxiety symptoms. Needless to say, I was heartbroken when what I expected to be the best time turned into this hole. But instead of panicking over those symptoms, which I've definitely had a history of doing, and amplifying my anxiety, I took a breath and decided the best approach would be for me to sit down with myself and ask myself what I'm feeling and why. Because I shouldn't have to exist in that state of emptiness, and neither should you. I can't remember exactly how long I spent journaling on this, but I came to understand a lot more about my situation. First, I was able to recognize some of my symptoms as feeling overwhelmed, and so I explored the cause of that. As I've already emphasized, this was the first time in recent memory that I had complete time freedom. Despite that seeming like a positive thing, it really did feel completely foreign to my nervous system. I don't know about you guys, but when I get overwhelmed, I start to shut down and have a really hard time functioning or managing my emotions, which led to those negative feelings. I didn't have the structure of having to get up at a specific time, of work, of chores, of anything. And without that baseline structure that I'd been taking for granted, I turned into a puddle. My brain and nervous system were just so overwhelmed by the endless, mundane daily decisions I needed to make. They were unable to function, leaving me feeling lost, incapable, and stuck. But once I understood this, the way my brain and body reacted to those unstructured days made complete sense. I felt like I knew why I had begun to feel empty and anxious at a time that was supposed to be so enjoyable. I was no longer stressed over the not knowing of why I was feeling the way I was or what I needed to do about it. It was clear. My days off needed to have some level of structure to support me and my brain and to allow my creative energy and joy to thrive. This is where those more structured and specific expectations come into play. It's something that still feels a bit new to me, but I'm exploring how to create more definitive expectations to support me. I'm actively learning and discovering what works for me and what doesn't. Here's the story of a structured expectation I'm currently working on implementing to make my day-to-day life easier and reclaim some of my energy. I often struggle with feeding myself, which I know a lot of us ADHD girlies deal with. Time and time again, I find myself feeling like there's nothing to eat. Whether it's a lack of foods I actually enjoy, not having a protein source for dinner, or there being nothing quick, easy, and low effort for me to make. It feels like a constant struggle. An obstacle I've identified is having a reliable supply of nutritious and affordable foods that I actually want to eat. Recently, back when I was struggling that other week, it dawned on me that the way to create that reliable supply is to make going to the grocery store a routine part of my week. But how do I actually go about creating that? Going to the grocery store has always felt like such a hassle. It's about a 12-minute walk to my preferred grocer, which becomes about 25 minutes of travel time. Not to mention creating an effective grocery list, remembering to bring the reusable bags, actually doing the shopping, and carrying those heavy, overfilled bags back home. Every time I return from the store, I am out of breath and sweaty from the walk home with those heavy ass bags. And that's enough to make me resent getting groceries. That resentment translates to me continually procrastinating the store, becoming lower and lower on food, and needing to buy more and more things, exacerbating the issues and reasons going to the store feels so difficult in the first place. I decided I want to create some sort of structure and expectation to address this challenge. The plan I came up with is to schedule a specific time for me to go to the store each week. I figured if I have time specifically set out to get groceries, then it won't feel like such a hassle and I won't have to deal with the internal debate of when to go and my own procrastination. Setting the expectation that I will go to the grocery store at a specific time each week adds structure to my days. It means I'll constantly have access to a variety of nutritious and delicious foods. It'll make it so going to the store doesn't feel like such a chore every time. I won't get to the point of needing to buy 4 bags worth of groceries and trudge home exhausted with them. I won't keep getting stuck in that cycle of feeling like I have nothing to eat, but no energy to come up with solutions. And I settled on going to the store kind of between 2 and 5 p.m. on Mondays. And that's whether I need groceries or not. But I always do, so why am I even saying that? This is a goal I have for myself. It's something that I'm trying to create. I've met this expectation maybe 3 times since setting it, but I'm committed to continuing to try and make this a part of my life. I believe it will create positive outcomes that will support my functioning, reduce my stress, and return my energy. These more structured expectations don't have to be things that cause us anxiety. A past version of myself would have been stressed and felt so much guilt and shame for only being able to follow through on this expectation 3 times so far. But my current self knows that nothing is meant to start out perfect. Not meeting an expectation doesn't mean I've failed. And that the whole reason for me setting this expectation is to help me and reduce stress. So it's needless and would be counterintuitive for me to feel negatively towards myself over not meeting this expectation more. Over the past few years, I've used loose and unconstrained expectations to heal my relationship with what I expect from myself. It took a while and conscious effort to create a healthy and productive relationship with expectations for building habits. And now I've begun learning how to create and use more structured and specific expectations in a healthy and beneficial way. And this is something I know you will be able to do as well. And it starts with being conscious of the types of expectations you set for yourself. It's important to weigh the benefits of either type and figure out which is most beneficial to you in your current state. It's not something that's going to be forever. From my own experience, I often fluctuate between the different types, just depending on what's going on in my life. And neither one is better or worse than the other, but rather they have specific benefits and uses and are ideal for different circumstances. So being able to function with the more structured and constrained expectations does not make you any better or worse at creating and utilizing expectations. Because the whole point of these expectations is to help us build habits. And the real skill is in learning how to choose and set the most supportive expectations for you and your circumstances. To build this skill, it's very important that you have the healthy foundational mindsets to support you as you build habits. To create these mindsets for yourself, you need to watch my previous video on habit building. You'll finally start creating sustainable habits. I'll have it linked in the description and on screen now. These concepts are truly essential to begin living your dream reality. Thank you so much if you made it to the end. As always, I hope some of what I shared resonates with you. Take whatever information serves you and leave the rest. Leave a comment if you relate to any of the struggles we've talked about today, if you have any content requests, or if you just want to say hi. And remember, you're a hell of a lot more than you give yourself credit for. Till next time, bye.